In the Holler, we don't just bury our dead and move on. We have duties to the living that remain. We bank the fire, we turn the mirrors, and we tell the bees. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're sitting there in your modern world with your climate-controlled house and your store-bought honey, wondering what in the world I'm talking about. But up here in these old mountains, in the places where the mist still clings to the ridgelines come morning, there are families who remember. There are folks who still know that when death comes calling, you've got more to tend to than just grief and funeral arrangements. You've got to tell the bees, welcome back to Legends from the Holler. Grab a chair and settle in, because today I'm going to tell you about the secret messengers of the mountains. See, my grandmother. She taught me this when I was no higher than a fence post. She'd take me out to the bee gums. Those old hollow log hives my great-grandfather had set up along the south side of the barn where the sun hit just right. And she'd talk to those bees like they were neighbors come to visit. She'd tell them about the weather turning, about my uncle's new truck, about Cousin Sarah's baby on the way. She treated those bees with the kind of respect you'd give your own blood kin. And that's because, in the old way of thinking, that's exactly what they were. Now, let me paint you a picture of how it was. Back when these mountains were still wild and a family's survival hung on what they could grow, preserve, and put by for winter, bees weren't just insects buzzing around the garden. They were essential. They were the heartbeat of the farm. Their honey sweetened the bitter herbs. It preserved the fruit. It healed wounds when there was no doctor within a day's ride. Beeswax made the candles that pushed back the dark on long winter nights. It sealed the jars and waterproofed the leather. But more than that, bees were considered wise. They were thought to have one foot in this world and one foot in the next. They could see things we couldn't see. They knew things we couldn't know. They were messengers, flying between the world of men and the world of spirit, carrying news both ways. So when something important happened in a family, something that changed the fabric of who you were and how you lived, you had to tell the bees. You had to keep them informed, because if you didn't, if you shut them out of the family circle, they would take offense. And an offended bee colony was a disaster you just couldn't afford. It was a sign of disrespect that could lead to the bees leaving, or worse, dying off completely, taking their luck and their blessings with them. The most important time to tell the bees was when death came. Now, death in the mountains has always been a solemn affair, surrounded by ritual and tradition. There are things that must be done, and they must be done in order. When someone passed, you'd stop the clocks in the house at the moment of death. You'd cover the mirrors with black cloth so the departing soul wouldn't get confused and trapped in the glass. You'd open a window to let the spirit find its way out. You'd sit with the body. You'd lay out the deceased in their Sunday best. And then, before the sun set on that first day, someone had to go tell the bees. This wasn't a job for just anyone. Usually, it fell to the head of the household or to whoever was closest to the deceased. Sometimes it was the eldest child. Sometimes it was the widow or widower. But whoever went, they went alone, and they went with respect. The ritual was specific, handed down through generations with the kind of care you give to sacred things. You'd approach the hives in the late afternoon when the foragers were coming home and the light was turning golden. You'd walk slow and deliberate. This wasn't the time for hurrying. The bees needed to see you coming, needed to sense your sorrow. When you reached the first hive, you'd knock 3 times, soft and gentle, the way you'd knock on a neighbor's door when you've got bad news to deliver. Tap, tap, tap. And you'd wait a moment, letting the sounds settle, letting the bees inside quiet their buzzing to listen. Then you'd lean in close to the entrance of the hive, close enough that your breath would stir the air near the opening, and you'd whisper the news. The words were important. They had to be just right. Most folks used the old phrase, the one that had been passed down from the British Isles and across the ocean, carried in the memories of those who settled these mountains. The master is dead, but don't you go. Sometimes people would say more. They'd give the name of the deceased. They'd say when it happened. They'd promise the bees that they'd still be cared for, still be tended, still have a home. But those 7 words were the heart of it. The master is dead, but don't you go. Because that was the fear, you see. The fear was that the bees, learning of the death and feeling excluded from the family circle, would leave. They'd swarm and fly off to find a new home with a family that respected them proper. Or worse, they'd simply die. The whole colony collapsing in grief, like they'd lost the will to go on. And it happened. Lord knows it happened. My grandmother told me about a family up on Coon Creek. This would have been back in the 20s or 30s. The old man of the house died sudden. Heart gave out while he was splitting wood. His son was so torn up with grief that he forgot. In all the chaos and the crying and the making of arrangements, he forgot to tell the bees. They buried the old man on a Thursday. By Sunday, every hive on that property was silent as a tomb. The bees hadn't swarmed. They hadn't flown away. They'd just died, thousands of them. Laying in drifts on the bottom boards of the hives like they'd given up the ghost, right along with their keeper. The son never kept bees again after that. Said he couldn't bear it. Said he'd failed in his duty and the bees had known it. Now, telling the bees wasn't the end of the ritual. After the news was delivered, after you'd whispered to each hive in turn, you'd drape them in mourning. Just like you'd hang black crepe on the door of the house, just like you'd wear black armbands and dark clothes, the hives had to show their respect. You'd take black cloth, usually crepe if you had it, or black muslin or even just dark fabric torn from an old dress or shirt, and you'd drape it over each hive, covering them like you were tucking in a grieving child. The bees would stay in mourning as long as the family did. Some folks kept the draping on for a week, some kept it for a month. And during that time, you'd speak to the bees softly when you passed. You'd check on them gentle-like. You'd let them know they were remembered. They were part of the sorrow. They were sharing in the loss. There was a woman over in the next holler from where I grew up. Miss Addie Prophet was her name. She kept the mourning drapes on her hives for a full year after her husband passed. Every Sunday, she'd walk out there in her black dress and she'd talk to those bees like she was talking to him. She'd tell them about her week. She'd ask their advice. She'd cry sometimes, and the bees would hum low and steady, like they were humming a hymn. Her honey that year was the darkest anyone had ever seen, and folks said it tasted of sorrow. Not bitter, mind you, but deep and rich and complex, like it carried the weight of grief transformed into something you could swallow without it choking you. But death wasn't the only news you'd tell the bees. See, the bees needed to know about all the big changes in a family's life. They were part of the household, and you couldn't leave them in the dark about joyous occasions any more than you could about sorrowful ones. When there was a wedding coming, you'd tell the bees. You'd go to the hives weeks before the ceremony, and you'd let them know, oh, there's to be a wedding. You'd say, a bride is coming to the house, or the young master is taking a wife. You'd invite them to share in the celebration. Some folks would even tie ribbons on the hives, bright colors to match the wedding flowers. Because if you didn't tell them, if the bees found out through some other means that there'd been a wedding and they hadn't been informed, they'd turn spiteful. The honey would go bitter. The queen might stop laying. The colony might refuse to build comb or gather pollen. They'd go on strike, essentially until the slight was made right. And births, oh, births were important news. When a baby came into the world, you'd take the infant out to meet the bees. Not right away, of course. You'd wait until the mother was up and about, until the baby was strong enough to travel the short distance to the hives. But within the first few weeks of life, that child would be introduced. You'd hold the baby up to the hives and you'd say, bees, we've a new member of the family. This is Little John or Mary or whatever the name might be. He's one of ours now, and you'll be seeing him about the place. Treat him kind. It was believed that babies introduced to the bees this way would never be stung. The bees would recognize them as kin and would protect them same as they'd protect the queen. My own mother was taken to the bees when she was 3 weeks old. My grandfather carried her out wrapped in a quilt his mother had made, and he held her up to each hive in turn. She used to tell me that she was never once stung in her entire childhood. Even when she'd play right next to the hives, even when she'd press her face up close to watch the bees come and go. They knew her. She was family. The bees had to know about property changes too. If the farm was sold, if land was divided up among children, if new buildings went up, the bees needed to be informed. They were stakeholders, in a sense. Their work depended on knowing the lay of the land, knowing where they belonged, knowing who they answered to. There's an old story about a man who inherited a farm from a distant uncle. He came from the city, didn't know nothing about mountain ways. He looked at those old bee gums and thought they were relics, thought they were quaint but useless. He never introduced himself, never told the bees about the change in ownership. Figured they were just insects, and insects don't care about human affairs. Within a month, those bees had swarmed and settled in the walls of his house. They filled the space between the studs with comb, thousands upon thousands of pounds of honey dripping down through the plaster. Cost him a fortune to remove them, and the house was never quite right after. You could hear them sometimes, folks said, even after they were gone. A phantom humming in the walls like the bees were reminding him of his disrespect. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this is superstition. You're thinking this is old mountain foolishness. The kind of thing that belongs in the past with bloodletting and hex signs and planting by the moon. But here's the thing. Here's what I want you to understand. Whether the bees actually cared about being told, whether they actually understood the words or felt offense at being excluded, that's almost beside the point. What mattered was the act itself. What mattered was the practice of including the natural world in your human concerns. These people, our ancestors in these mountains, they lived close to the bone. They lived in a world where nature could kill you or sustain you, often in the same day. They understood something we've forgotten. They understood that you don't stand apart from the natural world. You're woven into it. You're part of the same fabric. When you tell the bees about a death, you're acknowledging that your sorrow ripples outward. You're recognizing that loss affects more than just the people in your house. The garden will miss the one who tended it. The animals will miss the one who fed them. The bees will miss the one who cared for their hives. When you tell the bees about a birth or a wedding, you're expanding your circle of celebration. You're saying that joy isn't just a human thing. It's something that should be shared with all the lives that share your land. You're practicing humility. You're practicing connection. You're practicing the kind of attention to the world around you that we've largely lost. We live in a time now where we've sealed ourselves off. We've put walls between ourselves and everything else that lives. We climate control our houses so we don't have to notice the weather. We buy our food wrapped in plastic so we never have to think about where it came from or what had to happen to get it to our table. We take antibiotics when we're sick instead of knowing which plants might heal us. We buy candles at the store instead of harvesting wax from our own bees. We've stopped talking to the world around us. We don't tell the bees anymore because we don't have bees. And if we do have them, they're a hobby, not a necessity. There's something we manage, not something we're in relationship with. We've forgotten that there's something powerful in speaking to the creatures we share this world with, in acknowledging them, in treating them like they matter beyond their utility to us. And I think we've lost something essential in that forgetting, because when you tell the bees, you're really doing something for yourself. You're slowing down. You're stepping out of your human-centered world for a moment. You're opening yourself up to the idea that there are other kinds of intelligence, other kinds of knowing, other kinds of grief and joy that exist alongside your own. You're practicing a kind of kinship that doesn't ask what's in it for you. The bees up here in these mountains, the ones that are left, they don't hum the way they used to. Oh, they're still here, working the wildflowers and the blackberry brambles, but their numbers are fewer. The diseases hit them hard. The pesticides drift up from the valley farms. The climate isn't what it was. But there are still folks in these hollers who remember. There are still people who go to their hives when someone dies, who whispered the news, who drape the mourning cloth, who invite the bees to weddings and introduce them to babies, not because they think they'll be cursed if they don't, but because it's a way of remembering who they are. It's a way of staying connected to something older than themselves. It's a way of saying that in a world that moves too fast and forgets quickly, there are still rituals that matter. There are still relationships that deserve tending. My grandmother, she's been gone near 20 years now. When she died, I was the one who went to the bees. I walked out to those old gums in the late afternoon light, and I knocked 3 times soft on the weathered wood. And I leaned in close, and I whispered, "The mistress is dead, but don't you go." The humming in those hives changed. I swear it did. It went lower, slower, like a song shifting into a minor key, like they were singing her home. I draped them in black fabric I'd cut from an old dress of hers, one she'd worn to church for years, and I visited them every day of that first week, talking to them like she had, telling them about the people who came to the funeral, about the songs we sang, about how much we missed her. Those bees are still there. Their descendants anyway, still humming on the south side of that old barn, still making honey that tastes like these mountains, like wildflowers in mystery and the passage of time. And sometimes when I visit, I still tell them things. I tell them about my own children growing up, about the seasons changing, about the world spinning on beautiful and terrible and strange. I tell them because it matters to remember that we're not alone here, that we share this earth with millions of other lives, each one precious, each one worthy of respect. I tell them because in a world that's forgotten how to listen, the act of speaking to the wild things is a kind of prayer. I tell them because the mountains still hold their secrets close. And the bees, well, the bees still know things we've forgotten. So the next time you see a hive or a bee working a flower, or hear that ancient hum on a summer afternoon, stop for a moment, pay attention, maybe even speak. Tell the bees your news. You might be surprised what comes back to you in return. Not words, maybe, but something older than words, something that hums in the blood and the bone, something that remembers when we were all kin, human and bee and bloom, all of us part of the same vast family, living and dying and being born again under the same mountain sky. That's the old way. That's the way these mountains still remember, if you know how to listen. And that hum you hear, echoing through the hollers on a quiet evening, that's not just bees. That's the sound of the world still trying to talk to us, waiting patient as stone for us to remember how to answer back. Thank you for sitting a spell with me here in the holler. It is a rare thing these days to stop and listen to the stories that the earth is still trying to tell us. But I am glad we could do it together. If you have a story of your own, maybe a time your family told the bees, or a sign you saw when a loved one passed, I would be honored to hear it. Please share those memories in the comments below. Every story you tell helps keep these mountains alive and ensures the old ways are never truly forgotten. If you find value in these deep dives into our shared history and the quiet legends of Appalachia, I invite you to join our community here by subscribing to the channel. We have more stories to tell and more secrets to uncover from the shadows of the hills. Until we meet again at the next turn in the road, keep your ears open to the wind and your heart quiet enough to hear the hum. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.